Hello, hello, everybody. My name is Kelsey, and we are live. You are here for Summer School Sippin series. So we're going to do this every single week, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. This is the pack that you should have gotten for this. If you didn't order it yet, you can still go to williamchriswines.com and get yours. So just a little bit about what we're going to be doing every week. This is going to be throughout the entire summer. I think we have 15 episodes planned for you guys. This is a deep dive into Texas education. We're going to drink a bottle of wine every week, maybe the whole bottle, maybe just a glass of that bottle. Your preference. It depends how long the day was and how long the week was, I guess. We're starting with the Wanderer series. This is Relief Project number 2. So we've released one of these before. This is in collaboration with a sommelier named Ali Schmidt, and it has proceeds going to Feeding Texas, and that's the purpose of the Relief Project. So that's what we're going to be tasting today. The rest of the bottles that you got in your pack, save those for the next 3 weeks. So we're going to release these in 4-week portions so that you have all the wines that you need for the next 4 weeks. So week number 2 is going to be the Roussanne, the 2020 vintage that's newly released. The 2019 Grenache from Pradera is week 3. And then we're going to finish off the month with the Tempranillo from Parr Vineyards, the 2017. Put the last 3 away. We're going to start with the Wanderer series. I'm super excited to get this started. And full honesty, I always get very nervous for these, but I am excited to, first of all, taste this wine for the first time and then kind of chat with y'all and get your questions and your discussion topics for Texas wine. Before we open this wine, just a little bit about myself. I don't know if I've met everybody who's going to be tuning in today. My name is Kelsey. You may know me as Kelsey Renee. If you see me at the Vineyard, maybe doing Texas versus the World or the Art of the Blend. I'm always at the release parties, putting together some fun experiences for y'all. So if I have met you, that's awesome. If I haven't met you, I really want to know more about you, where you're coming from, what kind of wine you like to drink. So please, in the comments section, if you're on Facebook or YouTube, I have my computer right here and I can see some of your comments. So hi, Kelly. Yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself, because I really want this to be discussion based. That would be awesome, so I can get to know everybody. All right, let's get wine in the glass. So every week when we start these, what I really want to do is I want to assess the wine with you guys. So I haven't opened this, nor have I ever tasted this wine before. This is a brand new experience to me. On the back, it says this is a blend of Sanso and Carignan. If you're not familiar with those grapes, that's fine. We'll talk more about those and what they should taste like, where they grow in the world, why we're working with them. I already know a little bit what to expect because I have had Carignan and Sanso before. But a practice that I always recommend, and this is something we're going to do every single week, is assessing the wine before you treat it a certain way. So you may have seen on the website, on the shop page, we're selling this wine. It says to chill it down. If you chilled this down already, that's awesome. You're really going to enjoy it. How we came to that conclusion was by assessing the wine. I smell the wine to make sure there's nothing funky on the top of it. Funky is not necessarily a bad thing. It just may mean that it needs to be open for a little while. The funk will blow off. It can also mean that there's a wine flaw, but not always. All right, so we have this wine open. Pour yourself 1 ounce to 2 ounces. It's about this much. Always start by looking at the color. This is beautiful. It's kind of a dusty cherry, but really, really light in color. Cinsault and Carignan can both be very dark in color. So already I can tell this is going to be maybe a light-bodied wine with a lot of fruit in it, but who knows? What do y'all get on the smell? Tell me in the comments. What are you getting on this? Is there cherry? Is there some blueberry in there? Is it herbaceous? Does it smell sweet? It smells kind of sweet to me. And maybe that's just because the fruit is really, really popping and opulent. Now, I haven't chilled this down. This has come straight out of the box. I didn't do anything to it. So what I'm assessing here is how I'm going to treat this wine. And when I say treat this wine, I mean, are you going to drink it straight out of the bottle? Are you going to let the wine warm up a little bit? If you did pull it out of the fridge, maybe it's too cold and you want to change how you've treated it from there. Or maybe you want to chill it down a little bit. Maybe you want to chill it down a lot. Or maybe you want to decant it. So every week, what we're going to do is assess the wines and decide what may be the best treatment for this wine. Always keeping in mind that it really depends on your palate and your preference. If you like your wines cold, you're most likely going to chill down the wine, whether we recommend that or not. I want you to do what's right for you. So me right now, it's kind of hot outside. I'm already thinking this is a light colored wine. It smells kind of sweet. I really want to chill this down, but let's taste first. All right, first, was that what you expected? This is bone dry. It's completely dry. There's no sugar in this. It smells sweet, but it doesn't taste sweet. There is not a lot of sugar in this wine. If there is a little bit, it's not very apparent. It's tart. Yeah, there's totally cranberry on there. Thanks, Catherine, for that note. Cranberry, there's raspberry. This is a red berry fruited wine. But I get kind of on the back end, there's some other flavors popping up and around there. I would kind of like to encourage those to come out. So I think what I'm going to do, because I want to be drinking a cold wine right now, I think it would be really refreshing to chill this down a little bit. But I want to gently decant this. Now, this wine doesn't have like a huge punch in the face impact. It doesn't have a lot of tannin, none of that sandpaper feeling that you can get with some bold red wines like a Tempranillo or a Cabernet Sauvignon. So I'm not going to heavy decant this. When you heavy decant, it means you're adding a lot of oxygen to the wine and you're trying to iron out that dryness. You're trying to make it come into balance with itself. But I would say this is already pretty balanced. I want a gentle decant because I just want maybe some more of those herbs or anything that's hiding under that beautiful basket of fruit to come out and around. So I'm going to grab my little gentle decanter. This is my 1 glass decanter. I'm not going to drink a ton during this. That's just the kind of day I've had. I'm fairly relaxed. I'm just going to lightly pour this in and see if that kind of gently coaxes out some stuff. Oh, that's not enough. Feel free to decant the entire bottle. But again, this is imbalanced. Gently decant it. If you shake up this in a big decanter, you may lose some of the aromas and the aromatics. We don't want to damage the wine. We just want to encourage oxygen to hit more of the surface area. And then I'm going to place this in a little ice bucket, which I have off to the side here. So every week when you come in, if you have an ice bucket and a decanter, I encourage you to bring it because we're going to treat these wines differently every single time. Or you can just throw in the comments how you treated it, what you thought to do with it. But taking this time to assess the wine before actually diving in and treating it before you've tasted it, I think is so important. It helps build a relationship between you and wine, and it helps you figure out what not to do in the future and what patterns emerge. Maybe you treat Cinsault very similar to this one every single time you drink it because you found the way that works for you. Speaking of the grapes, Cinsault and Carignan is what's in here. Cinsault is a grape that was born in France. Now it's used widely in Morocco and Lebanon. This is a lush, fruity grape that's often used for blending, just to add some, nice, soft red fruit to a wine. You'll see it used in the south of France in places like Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It adds a softness to a blend that's full of really big, bold grapes. This is the light touch grape. It can also get kind of high in alcohol, but looking at this is 12.6% alcohol, so we're not getting into that high alcohol Cinsault yet. And then you'll also see this growing in South Africa as well. Tell me about Cinsaults that you've had before. I've had some fabulous ones from South Africa and Australia as well, but this is becoming a real defining grape for Texas too. And there is 6% Carignan in this. Carignan originally was called Carignana. It's a Spanish grape. So this grows alongside grapes like Tempranillo, Grenache as well. It is herbal, it can be dusty, it can be red fruited. This is a very intriguing grape. When you don't know a grape and it's blended in with grapes that you recognize, assume that they have some opposite characteristics. And what I mean by that is if you knew that Cinsault was lush and light and kind of adds a lot of alcohol to a wine, assume that the Carignan is the opposite. It's adding something different. Why would you blend in something similar when you could just do 100% Cinsault? So these are opposing grape varieties. That Carignan is adding something in here. And in my mind, before I assessed the wine, I thought I might want to decant this because I want to encourage that Carignan to creep out and over the Cinsault because there is so much Cinsault in this. So the other cool thing about this wine is it comes from 3 different vineyards. So even though we're using 2 different grapes, because one grape from a certain vineyard will taste totally different than that same grape from another vineyard, we're blending a lot more than just 2 grapes here. We're blending a lot of different flavors. This should have a ton of complexity to it. So with that decanting and light chilling, I'm hoping that we're going to coax some of that out. And I want you to tell me in the discussion, what's changing in the wine for you as you treat it differently? This is fantastic summer red. Thanks, Lynette, who was thinking barbecue, because I totally was. This is the cornerstone to tons of heavy Texas food. Barbacoa tacos, anybody? I'm starving right now. I'm gonna go have some food after this. All right, so I've chilled down my wine lightly enough. Probably got it down maybe 4 or 5 degrees cooler. And now we can have a nice solid glass. All right, so today we are breaking down Texas AVAs. These are the different regions that define Texas. The reason I wanted to start with this is because this is the Wanderer series, which means we should be wandering across Texas right now. We're going to talk about all of the 8 regions that are currently defined as wine growing regions in Texas. This is where it all starts. Maybe you're familiar with some, maybe you've been to some, maybe you've seen the grape varieties that are growing there. Maybe you've heard the grapes taste different from place to place. This is the start of where we start to find out why that is. And I expect you to have a lot of questions. If I don't get them, if I don't get to the questions now, I'm going to get to them next week. So make sure you're here next week when we talk about the next topic. And I'll always start off by answering the questions that I didn't get to. All right, so look at the back of your Wanderer series first. It says Wanderer Series Relief Project number 2, 92% Cinsault, 8% Carignan, and then it says Texas High Plains. That is an AVA. An AVA means American Viticulture Area. So the Tax and Trade Bureau is who regulates this. Basically, you petition for an area that is defined by a certain set of qualities. Maybe it's climate, maybe it's soil, maybe it's just plain geography. You petition to have that area designated as an AVA. And that is a signal to the consumer when you see Texas High Plains on a label that your grapes are coming from that area 1 and that it's defined by a certain set of characteristics. I'm going to show you my little map here. These are the AVAs of Texas. There are 8 right now. I want you to get a really close view of this. So just commit this to memory. Up in the Panhandle, you see the Texas High Plains. That is where your Wanderer Series Relief Project 2 grapes are coming from. 3 different vineyards, all in the Texas High Plains. This wine is representing what the Texas High Plains tastes like when it's made from Cinsault and Carignan. You know, if you're familiar with William Chris wines, that we work with a lot of single vineyard wines. This is one that's a blend. Next week, we're going to get into another blend. The next week, we're getting Grenache from La Pradera Vineyards. So we're going to slowly break down what the large down to the very small single sites can taste like and how that changes from place to place. Now, I want you to look at the biggest region in there. That's in the center of Texas. That is the Texas Hill Country. That is where we are located. That's William Chris Vineyards. We are in the heart of the Texas Hill Country. Inside of that, you see two smaller boxes. One is the Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country AVA, and there's another called Bell Mountain AVA. Those are two AVAs, American Viticulture Areas, that are inside of the larger Texas Hill Country AVA. And I'm going to tell you why those popped up separately, even though they're inside. Now go up north of that and you'll see Texoma AVA, and that's butting up against Louisiana. And then let's go out west, all the way over towards El Paso. You see a teeny tiny little purple area. That is Mesilla Valley AVA. Going east a little bit, you see the Texas Davis Mountains AVA. And just east of that, you see Escondido Valley AVA. So that's all the AVAs that we're going to talk about today. There are some really funny stories to some of these. Each one of them is totally different. The petition process to create an AVA is very interesting. Basically, an individual or a group of individuals can submit a petition, and the Tax and Trade Bureau takes a couple of years hearing comments from other people, basically announcing to the world that this petition has been submitted and seeing what people say about it. And then they'll make a decision to add that AVA or to not. To this point, I don't know about any petitions that have not been passed in Texas. But right now, these AVAs are what define Texas. That does not mean we won't have more in the future. In fact, I expect for the boundaries to change on some of these, and I expect for more to pop up. And this is as the growth of Texas happens. Before we start breaking down the individual AVAs, I want you to picture France in your mind. About the same size as Texas. I want you to think about how many different regions in France there are for wine. You know, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, the Rhone Valley, Alsace is up near Germany. All of those regions are separated from each other very similar to how this map is. Or, sorry, this map. This is how regions start to be defined, and this is what ultimately we will be known for around the world. People will get a Texas High Plains wine and think of that like a champagne. That's how specific it gets. You get a specific style, a specific set of characters when you get Texas High Plains on a label. Now, you may know that some legislation just passed in Texas. This is the Grape Compromise. We're going to talk more about this legislation in the next set of classes. This is going to be, what is now, July? August. That's going to be in August. Oh, it's June. So maybe in July or August, we're going to really break down the Grape Compromise and talk about that legislation. But what I want you to take away just today is that now legally, and this happened this year, if you see Texas High Plains on a label, 100% of your grapes are coming from Texas. When you see Texas High Plains on a label, what it means is that 85% of your grapes must come from the Texas High Plains, and 15% can come from somewhere else, but it must be in Texas. This is legislation that's ensuring that you know that this is coming from quality grapes from a quality area. Now, taking one final look at this map, all of the blue boxes are vineyards that we work with, and we're constantly finding new vineyards to work with. Great grapes are out there that we don't know about. We're constantly finding those. Not all of the vineyards that we work with fall in these AVAs, and I want to be very clear. Just because a vineyard is not in an American viticulture area does not mean that you don't have quality grapes. High Cross Vineyards does not fall in a Texas AVA currently, but those are some high quality grapes. So even though you may only see Texas on a label, maybe you won't see an AVA on the label, when you trust a producer, you can trust that you're getting quality grapes. And it makes it a little bit difficult to find the pattern of what is always going to be high quality. But the reality is you have to find a producer that you trust that's looking at vineyards who are producing high quality fruit, and they have a passion for finding that fruit. All right, so let's dig in a little bit, talk about each of these AVAs. The first thing that I want to do is read to you about the Texas High Plains. And I apologize to read from a paper, but I thought this was such a perfect piece of this petition. So this is coming from the petition for the Texas High Plains appellation. This is what was submitted. So this was submitted in 1993. This was fairly recent. Since the Texas High Plains became an AVA, there have only been 2 more added. We've really slowed down. We've identified the areas, and they are now set in stone. We're taking the time to build out the current AVAs that we have, which is exciting. Okay, so in this petition, it says, the excellent quality is attributed to the Texas High Plains' high elevation, cool nights, rich soils, dry, disease-free conditions, and constant breezes. These conditions make the Texas High Plains the coolest production area in Texas. It is also one of the highest production areas in the U.S. At present, nearly half, 49.3% of all commercial wine grapes grown in Texas are grown in the area known as the Texas High Plains. This is so important because the submission for the Texas High Plains to become an AVA didn't happen until they were already producing almost 50% of the grapes that Texas is known for. My question was first, when I was first looking at Texas wine, why did it take so long for that area to be defined? If they were already recognized for producing some of the highest quality fruit in Texas, New Mexico was buying grapes from the Texas High Plains. Other areas in Texas were buying grapes from there. Before this was a legally designated area. Dry counties. That is where all the dry counties were. Prohibition really slowed the Texas wine industry down. In addition to that, agriculture has been a big part of Texas. We're just focusing on agriculture that was not Texas wine grapes. So all the dry counties up until the late 1900s were up in that area. And this is where the Panhandle is. This is Lubbock, Brownfield, that area. So before the Texas High Plains became a designated AVA, there were 5 other AVAs that were defined. And I want to talk to you a lot about the Texas Hill Country, but I'm going to go back in time first. So we talked about the Texas High Plains being defined by cool breezes. I need to take a sip of wine. We're supposed to be drinking wine during this, and none of y'all have reminded me about that. I hope you're enjoying this, by the way. Terry, that's a good question. Terry asked, was the Cinsault in the last year's Relief Project wine also from the Texas High Plains? And I am almost positive it was, but I'm going to confirm that for you. And just to note, the last Relief Project was a blend of Cinsault and Mervet. There was no Carignan in it at that time. And you know that William Christ is innovative. We're constantly changing the styles of wine that we're working with, even when they're in the same series. We don't want to give you the same thing year to year. We want you to be excited for something new. And Jennifer asked, does the new label start with the bottling year or growth year? Oh, that's a really good question. So if the legislation passed this year, it will be immediate. Yeah, so any labels that say Texas or have a county of Texas, have a vineyard in Texas or an AVA in Texas, will have to comply with those laws now. So that's starting now. So grapes that were harvested 3 years ago that are just being released will have to comply with these laws. That's a really, really good question. I can't wait to dive deeper into the legislation because clearly there's a lot of interest in that here. All right, so let's talk once more about the Texas High Plains. Texas High Plains is defined by, yes, cool breezes, fertile soil, but what I want you to really picture is that it is on an elevated flat plain. Not a lot of trees, it's flat. It It's defined by, on the west side, the New Mexico and Texas border. So that's how that was defined on that side. On the east side, it's defined by something called the Cap Rock Escarpment. Basically, you're at 3,000 to 4,000 feet above sea level when you're on this raised bed, and then it drops down to like 700 feet above sea level, and that it drops down at that Cap Rock Escarpment. So they decided to limit that area to the raised plain area. So you're getting higher elevation, and that leads to cooler nights and breezier days. Because there's not a lot of trees and because it's so flat, the wind blows over the entire thing and it cools down the entire area. It also, the wind blows away any disease pressure. And what was really interesting when I read this petition was it said that grapevines were not indigenous to this area. And since there aren't a lot of trees, just disease in the soil did not exist there. Whereas when you go onto the other side of the Cap Rock Escarpment, when you get into that valley, there's tons of disease in that soil because there's trees and there were grapevines indigenous to that area. And both trees and grapevines, they carry disease, as all plants do. It's in the soil. So this area, the Texas High Plains, is just disease-free. It's extremely unique, and it's really, really surprising to see such a large area that is so, free of that disease pressure. And this is 7.5 million acres. This is a really big area. So when you start to go south into the Texas High Plains, it starts to get into valley. So they capped that to where you're getting that high altitude. And when you go too far up north, when you get to too high of altitude and you get too far up north, what you start to get is frost. Frost is one of the major issues in all of Texas. It's a huge threat to grapevines. When you get into high elevation areas and where you get far up north, it becomes not even worth it. So the Texas High Plains stops at a certain northern area. When you go north of that, they had just decided that the risk was too much. You were going to get too much frost. It wasn't worth trying to grow grapes there. Again, that does not mean that north of the Texas High Plains, there are not quality grapes. You can have some exceptional grapes growing up north of that boundary, but they're probably at more of a risk to frost. It's less recommended that you plant grapes there because the investment may not be worth it. All right, so you know about the Texas High Plains. Now we're going to go back in time from 1993 all the way back to 1986. This is when the first AVA of Texas was defined. And just to give you a relation to William Chris, Bill Blackman planted his first vineyards in the not yet defined Texas High Plains area in 1983. So 3 years after that is when the first AVA became in Texas. So Bill Blackman was planting vineyards before that map you saw, before any purple area was defined, which is really, really cool. He has truly helped to define Texas by planting vineyards in places that, people didn't know too much about at the time. All right, so in 1986, there was a petition that was granted to make Bell Mountain AVA a designated wine growing region. Now remember, Bell Mountain and Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country are both in the Texas Hill Country. If William Chris is here, San Antonio's down here, Austin's over here, Bell Mountain's right in the center, about 30 miles, no, it's 15 miles north of Fredericksburg. And it's a teeny tiny little area. I think it's like 30,000 acres. It's really, really small. So this was, and I'm going to refer to my notes here, this was petitioned to become an AVA by the owner of Oberhelman Vineyards. So the winery in the area, they had vineyards already. In the petition, that person recognized that there were 10 wineries in that area already, and there was probably going to be more in the future. And that's because that specific area, Bell Mountain, that small area, was defined by volcanic eruption. And this is ancient volcanic eruption that lifted the area up to about 2,000 feet above sea level. So you get that high altitude. And that's what the Texas High Plains is defined by. You get colder nights and hotter days because of that. You also get the grapes lifted up towards the sunshine. So this area was defined by that high altitude, but also that ancient volcanic eruption also changed the soil in that spot compared to the rest of the area that's now the Texas Hill Country. So Bell Mountain is defined by sandstone and granite subsoil, bedrock, whereas the surrounding area is limestone. And that was their major defense in the petition for that area to be defined. So Bell Mountain not only has higher altitude than the surrounding area, and therefore kind of drier, cooler conditions, but it also has a very unique soil. They list all of the tests that they had done on the soil in that area. They found that it was highly acidic, and that's beneficial to the grapes in one way or another. So it's defined by those two things, mostly. The nearest vineyard that they did not include in that area was 12 miles south. And someone in that area petitioned for Bell Mountain to actually be larger than it eventually became. But the Oberhelman Vineyard owner basically denied that and said that 12 miles south of there, the soil was so different and the conditions were so different that it needed to be a little bit more exclusive. So Bell Mountain was established as a super small, this is the smallest AVA in Texas, is Bell Mountain. When you picture Bell Mountain, I want you to picture enchanted rock. That's basically what you're getting. You have clay, you have sand like a lot of the rest of Texas, but what you get is really chunky granite subsoil underneath there. About 2 years after this, Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country was petitioned for. Oh, Brandon, thank you for the reminder. It's time for a sip of wine. And now's the time for you to post in the comments, how has the wine changed? It's warmed up a little bit in the glass. Did you chill it down? How is it as it warms up? Do you feel maybe that bramble fruit and earth, and maybe there's a little spice or herbaceousness coming up over the top of the cinsault? Tell me about it. Tell me what you get. It has changed a lot, and I'm swirling this up and finding that a lot is coming out of this. It's a lot more unctuous and rich than it first was. I found it really tart and a little bit thin at first, but chilling this down and decanting it has really increased the body of this wine, which is a good way for me to know that decanting increases the body for me. If that's the same for you, then you know how to treat your wines when you want that body, or maybe you want something more refreshing, so don't decant it. All right. Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country. This was a really interesting petition to read through. So this happened 2 years after the Bell Mountain AVA was defined. And remember, I said there was a vineyard that was 12 miles south that had asked to be a part of Bell Mountain AVA. And basically, Mr. Oberhelman's response was that that area is so different, the soil is very different, the climate's very different, it can't be part of Bell Mountain, but maybe in the future there will be an AVA that can be called Pedernales Valley. That is what the current Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country AVA is. So the petition for this new AVA included that vineyard and a lot of others as well. So this was entirely Gillespie County. It's about 70,000 acres. And it ranged from 700 to 2,000 feet elevation. So you got that high altitude. The soil that they were defining was iron-rich clay. So iron-rich means you have kind of a red tinge to the soil. That's very beneficial to kind of protecting the grapes from disease. So that soil was specific to this area that they said, and different than the rest of the Texas Hill Country and the surrounding areas. They said that it was also defined by the Pedernales River and its tributaries. And water is super important for growing crops. And agriculture had been a big part of Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country. They got pushback from the Oberhelman group and also Grape Creek. So there were two letters sent to the Tax and Trade Bureau saying that Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country was not the right name for it. Fredericksburg was a city. It wouldn't help to make it recognizable for people. So the Tax and Trade Bureau actually had to interview people who lived in Fredericksburg and ask them what they believed the distance of Fredericksburg was, and could you believe that this vineyard over here would be called the Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country. They interviewed soil experts to ask how far that soil actually defined the region. And then finally, they looked at the local phone book, and they saw that the local phone book reached people out as far as the territory that had been in the petition. So in actuality, they could call it Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country, because that way people could associate the area correctly. So this is where we get into interesting discussions with a petition, because if a region isn't collectively assigned a name that's recognizable, it's really difficult to make an area an American viticulture area, because ultimately AVAs are being defined so that you can recognize, oh, Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country, I know in my mind where that's coming from. If you have a very obscure name for a region, you're not going to know where it's from, and that doesn't help define anything for the consumer. So the goal of all of these petitions, they are to define an area that has been called something for a long time and can be agreed upon as a quality area that's recognizable. I think it's so interesting that they went to the phone book for this. They also looked at the school district limits. So when we're talking about the defining areas for these regions, it's different for every single one. All right, on to Escondido Valley. So we've talked about Bald Mountain and Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country. These are both in the Texas Hill Country. But before the Texas Hill Country was defined, Escondido Valley kind of popped up. It's so different, the petition for this. Basically, there was one winery and 2 vineyards in this teeny tiny little area just west of the Texas Hill Country. They wanted to put Escondido Valley on their labels so that it could be defined, but they were the only winery and only vineyard out there, without really expecting more wineries and vineyards to pop up. So the petition reads basically like, hey, we'd really like for this area to be defined because we think it'll help our consumers recognize our wine, but we don't really expect more vineyards to come out here. And the response from the Tax and Trade Bureau was basically, we don't have a reason to deny this, so it's approved. It's a really, really interesting counterpoint to all of the different AVAs. There is even a miscellaneous subnote in the approval that says, the Tax and Trade Bureau recognizes this as an American viticulture area, but does not, how do they word it? It's not an endorsement of the quality of the grapes from the area. So this is just further proof that in Texas, if you're getting grapes from outside an AVA, it doesn't mean that they're worse than from a single AVA. Every area is defined by something different. So ultimately, Escondido Valley is defined by the Mesa ranges, the McKenzie Mesa ranges, and the Escondido Springs. It has water, it has altitude, and it has really, really deep, good draining soils, all things that you want for grape growing areas. And this is ultimately why it was approved. All right, now we get to the Texas Hill Country. This is an important area. It spans 9 million acres. This is the biggest AVA in Texas. It's also where we're located. So the reason that this became an AVA, it's so different across all the Texas Hill Country. It's such a big area. It's technically humid subtropical climate, but it changes in pockets. I mean, think about the Fredericksburg and the Texas Hill Country. It's far enough away from the Gulf that it's pretty dry. And then you think about Bell Mountain, you have high altitude and therefore a lot of wind. The rest of the Texas Hill Country is just as different from site to site. So you have kind of a mixed bag here, but ultimately you're in the Pedernales River Basin. So you have calcareous soil. You also have ancient volcanic activity in this area, and a lot of the soil is eroded. That's very, very unique. So you get really interesting soil combinations and varying altitude across the entirety of the Texas Hill Country. And the reason that this became defined as a whole area is because it had huge amounts of experimentation in the 70s. Remember Bill Blackman, one of our co-founders, he moved to the Texas Hill Country in, I think it was in the 1990s. So he moved to this area because of that experimentation that was happening, and that's why we're here now. We're sourcing grapes from the Texas High Plains where he started, and we're experimenting in the Texas Hill Country. This is where the growth is. This is where it's a huge melting pot. The area is defined by humidity. This is very interesting. And next week, when we talk about grape personalities, we'll talk about what grapes can handle the humidity, because a lot of them can't, which means the Texas Hill Country really has to be specific and thoughtful about what they're planting. And we'll talk a lot more about that. It's we can get into some really nerdy specifics, but we won't go there now. I just want you to know that Texas Hill Country is on the Edwards Plateau. The average level of elevation is about 1,500 feet above sea level. So you get high elevation, but definitely not the highest in Texas. All right. So then 2 years later, the Texas High Plains became an AVA. And then two more slipped in after that. There's the Texas Davis Mountains. This happened in 1998. That's 5 years after the last one. It's quite a long time. Texas Davis Mountains, super easy. It's the second highest mountain range in Texas. You get high elevation, like over 5,000 feet above sea level, up to 8,000 feet above sea level. Only very specific grapes can grow there, and that's a small area. It's defined by Mount Livermore. So the grapes that are being planted there are being planted on kind of raised aspects. So the grapes are being lifted up to the sun. You get cold nights. You get cool days with a lot of wind and a lot of sunshine. And that's a very specific set of growing conditions that makes the area very, very unique. We do source some grapes from the Texas Davis Mountains. And next time you come on site, come in and ask about it. Ask Chris what we're sourcing from there and why we're sourcing it from there. Because the Texas Davis Mountains is a really, really intriguing area that I think we'll be seeing more from in the future. The defined outer limits of that area, it's defined by highways. That petition was interesting. The highways follow the canyons and the escarpments that fall off. So they very simply said these highways can define the area because anything outside the highways is desert, basically. Once you get to the Texas Davis Mountains, you're basically in an oasis. It's cooler, it's more refreshing, it's greener. And outside of that, you're in the desert. And then finally, we get to Mesilla Valley, which was an AVA that was originally in New Mexico, and some border shifting happened. So now part of the Mesilla Valley, just that tip near El Paso, is a part of the Texas state now. So that was defined by mission grapes that came up from Mexico, and it was defined by Don Juan. Don Juan passed through and said, I'm going to call this the Mesilla Valley, and that ultimately became a very large growing region for New Mexico. And just because of that border change, that's the only reason that the Mesilla Valley is part of Texas. And funny story, that was originally a defined area in 1985. So that is technically the first AVA in Texas, although it wasn't part of Texas yet. Finally, Texoma AVA. So that's the one that's north near Louisiana. This is where a lot of the viticulture science has taken place. So we've done a lot of experimentation in that area with rootstocks, with hybrid grapes. That's where large agriculture centers for, the furthering of viticulture science is. And it's really hard to find any information about Texoma AVA. This was established in 2005. This is the most recent and the last AVA that's been defined. It's 2 million acres. It's pretty big. It's near Lake Texoma and Red River. But otherwise, it's just defined by having scientific advancement coming out of that area since the 1800s. I mean, this area has been active in viticulture for a very long time and has just been recently defined. As far as I know, William Chris doesn't source any grapes from there. Doesn't mean we won't in the near future. So what do you think? What's your favorite AVA? All of them have totally different stories. I like how they're defined by different things. These are the areas that going into the future, as we narrow down what each area is truly best for, these will become known for different things. People will associate the Texas High Plains with a specific set of grape varieties and a specific flavor profile versus the Texas Hill Country. And I know we'll see more AVAs popping up in the near future. And it's anyone's guess where they can be. But I hope you noticed a theme. High elevation is a big part of what's happening in Texas. It's so hot here. Without the high elevation, grapes really can't succeed. You need that diurnal shift. That means hot days, cold nights. You need a temperature fluctuation so that the grapes can ripen fully during the daytime and get some rest at night. At your valley level areas, that's really not possible. You also have too much disease pressure. And I want to leave us off by talking about why this is important worldwide. And I'm going to share my screen one last time because I want to show you a map. So they say that all grapes in the world grow between 30 and 50 degrees latitude. Texas is just below that 30-degree mark. Again, this is just a recommendation for where grapes typically grow. It doesn't mean they can't grow outside of that. We're closer to the equator, so we have a little bit shorter days. It's hotter, definitely. The mean temperature is very hot. The reason I want you to see this map is because look at where Texas is in comparison to South Africa, in comparison to Spain and France. That 30-degree line cuts through Texas and meets the top of South Africa, it meets Spain, it meets the south of France. Those are the areas where we are able to grow similar grapes. So when we're talking about all of these AVAs that define Texas, they're all at a certain latitude, and we're growing similar grapes to everything else that's at that same latitude. So at the same latitude is the top of South Africa. South Africa's working with Cinsault, it's working with Cabernet Sauvignon, it's working with Syrah. We're hitting the south of France where they're working with Grenache, Syrah, Cinsault. We're hitting Spain that's working with Tempranillo and Carignan, which is in your blend as well. And that's not including all of the white grain grapes of those areas. Roussanne is one of those from the south of France. So when you're looking for a particular wine style from one part of the world, follow that latitude. Whatever hits the same latitude as Texas is what you're going to find is similar. And that's how Chris Brundrett selected a lot of the grapes that he said would define Texas. Mervet is one of those. He went to areas that are at that same point in the world and said, this makes sense for Texas because we're at that same point. All of these areas that have been defined have very, very specific subsets of conditions, but ultimately the climate and the mean temperature is going to be defined by how close it is to the equator. And we'll talk much more about in future episodes. One more sip. All right. So every week I'm going to update you with what's going on at the vineyard. Right now, what's important to know is that on our website, we have a case special for this wine. And please start thinking about July 4th early. You're going to have a long weekend. It's going to be super hot. We're at record high temperatures right now, which means you need to chill down a case of Wanderer Series, and you can still get yours now. It's on the website for $250. That includes shipping. So you're getting over 2 bottles of the Wanderer Series for free. We know how to treat it now, and you can experiment with it. Warm one up one time, see how it tastes when it's fully decanted, then chill it down to white wine temperature and see how that tastes. You can have a huge amount of experimentation with this. You can also get more packs. If you really enjoyed this and you want to pass this on for other people, friends who are not close to you, send them a pack. Make sure to add on 2 extra bottles of the Wanderer series for July 4th. And finally, on the website, I want you to scroll all the way down the shop page, and there's a bestseller pack available. It's at such a good price right now. I want everyone to go and get one. This includes 4 of our best-selling wines, so you have an array. This is an awesome gift for somebody. If you don't know what to get them and you want to get a William Chris wine, this 4-pack is at such a good price. You can give them 4 bottles, and it's all of our most popular wines, including Hunter, Mary Ruth, it includes Enchante, and it includes something else as well. So go on the shop page, just check it out. I want to keep you guys updated with the specials and what's going on at the Vineyard. And every week we'll talk about something else. Well, that's what I have for you today. That was really fun to research and talk about. And just so everyone knows, the Tax and Trade Bureau, they have published all of these petitions and the discussion that went along with them. So if any of this really interested you, you could really deep dive into this information. It was really, really fascinating to read through all of it and find out the little intricacies, and that there was a little bit of drama, and it was a little spicy to read. I had a lot of fun doing it. And I'm sure that when future AVAs are added, we will talk more about it. I'm really curious to see what 16 years later the next AVA is going to look like, and how that petition is going to read. I really hope you enjoyed the Wanderer series as much as I did. When you are done with this bottle, if you didn't finish the whole thing, cork it and pop it in the fridge. It's going to last you for another 3 days. And the great thing is that every time you open it and take another sip, it's going to taste different because it's in contact with oxygen now. So don't pour it down the drain. Don't feel like you have to drink the whole thing tonight. Allow it to change over the next couple of days. Ultimately, if the wine goes bad after 5 days, use it in cooking. It's going to be the best cooking wine you've ever had. All right, guys, that's what I have for you. Any further questions, pop them in the comments, because they're all saved here, and I'm going to read through them and answer them next week. We talk about grape personalities, and we're drinking the Roussanne 2020. Come with it warm or lightly chilled, and we'll talk about how to properly treat that wine. All right, guys, that's all I have for you. Thanks so much. Thank you. And we're off.